Hi. So
Just
today on this conversation, we have a very interesting guest, and I met him last Saturday only, and he's kindly consented to come on this show. The purpose why I create this career conversations podcast is to inspire a lot of youngsters from tier two, tier three cities or villages that okay, the sky is the limit with respect to careers, provided you channelize your energies in the right direction. So today we have Rishab Somani, uh, whom I know because he is part of the incoming batch of IIM Ahmedabad PGP, the class of 2026. So Rishabh has been born and brought up in Calcutta, moved to the US for his undergrad, worked there, came back to India, now took the CAT and then applied for the that entire IMABC process, etc. So welcome to the show, Rishabh. And please tell us something about your formative years, your journey, how it
yeah.
was, what did you dream when you grew up, etc. Your family
Mhm.
background, maybe a typical Maheshwari background. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Hi, Anurag. Thank you for having me. Firstly, it's an honor to be here. And I'm happy to share my life's journey so far. So I was born in Kota, where my nani bari is. And but I did most of my growing up in Calcutta. For about the first 6 to 7 years, I was staying in Havra, and we were staying in a joint family. Typical Maheshwari family. My parents had an arranged marriage, but there was some internal strife that was happening, which caused us to separate. And then we moved, my parents moved with their two kids to this side of town, in Calcutta. And then my dad started his own company as a stockbroker. So he went from doing, a job that was 5,000 rupees a month to now having his own business at one point with 100, people working under him as a stockbroker, as an NSE registered member. So it's through, and my mom too. She's really talented. Like didn't get a lot of chance early on in her life to explore her artistic ambitions, but she went to the GD Birla Institute of Fine Arts here and got her diploma, and now she's working commercially on her art, and it's quite beautiful. And so from them I've learned how to overcome adversity and how to be exceptional. Really, I've always had them to look up to, for them to be able to raise a family, create a business, do everything they want to, live the life that their kids would want to live. That's where I draw my inspiration from. So I was here in Kolkata is where I did my schooling. I went to Birla High School. I was there all throughout from KG to class 12. Through various roles, I made a lot of really good friends. I'm still in touch with a lot of the teachers. It's a very wholesome community there. I studied commerce in 11 and 12. It was CBSE board. And I placed second in the state of West Bengal, in my class 12 boards. And it was Yeah, and it was really nice. But the thing was, I'd already gotten my admission done before I got the results for the board exams, so it didn't mean like as much to me at that point. But of course, it was, an overwhelming experience. My parents, especially, were really happy, with the result. Getting photographs in newspapers and interviews and all of that. So that was one of my proudest achievements. But then I went to the US to study. I did my Bachelor's of Science in Management, which is the degree their business school gives. I was at Tulane University. Their business school is called AB Freeman School of Business, and it's quite well. They have a lot of state-of-the-art facilities. And the best part about those classes was that they were a lot of experiential learning classes. Like for example, I was in this one class which was for honor students in the university, and it was about 20 students, and we were managing part of the business school's endowment. So the Freeman School of Business had about $100 million of endowment that they would invest, and based on the dividends and the returns that they would generate, they would pay administrative costs. So we were part of this team that of this fund. Out of the 100 million, this was about $5 million, 4.5 to $5 million at that point. And it was completely student managed. So there was 20 of us. We divided the portfolio up in in sectors. We had our picks from the last year's class that made the portfolio. Which ones we want to keep, which ones we want to sell. And then we would have at the end of the class, we'd had a voting round between all 20 of us. And we decided, which ones to go forward and which ones to not go forward. We had a professor who helped us study academic papers and understand, how to generate alpha. What are some of the things that have shown results, in a research setting. Uh, so it was an amazing
This as like an
experience.
undergraduate student in the third year or
Yes, I did this as an undergraduate student. Yes. So the best part about that college was their experiential learning classes. There was this other class called the Birkin Road Reports. So Tulane University is in New Orleans, which is like right on the bottom of the US. It's in the southeast corner essentially. And so that the south side of the US, Louisiana state specifically, is one of the most backward states in the US, so they don't really get a lot of coverage. So their idea, the university's idea, was that we target a few small cap, deep south stocks, companies that came from there but don't get a lot of ongoing coverage in terms of equity research. And then we created like an extensive financial model. We created like a 40-page report, and that we circulated. And it's usually used by, investment firms like Wall Street, all around because they don't get a lot of coverage. So doing that as part of my curriculum, before I even had a graduate degree, but getting that experience, that's very real world situation. You're having very real world consequences of whether you accomplish what you're setting out to do or not. That was really helpful in setting the tone for my professional career moving forward.
tell me one thing. I'm just curious. As a
Mhm.
student, you're investing these endowment funds, and what if the bet
Mhm.
went wrong? Would you be hauled on the
That's
coals, or is it okay?
no, 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 no. They gave us immunity. They wouldn't haul us over the coals, in case something went wrong. But it's our goal essentially was to generate a higher return at a lower risk. So our portfolio, they divided it up into three sections. They had one for the large cap section, which was the biggest one, the part that I was, and they had one for mid cap and small cap as well. And so out of the 500 companies in S&P 500, we had to select 30 companies. And I'm happy to report we did do well. Like, I went back a year later and I looked at our portfolio to see how we did compared to the S&P 500, and we were, about 1% higher, at a lower risk, at a much lower volatility reading. So, I think for the first time it was quite a unique experience, quite an informative experience, because we had to create based on all of the research papers that we read and the investment strategies of, the George Soros, sorry, of the George Soros and Warren Buffett. Like, there we created our own proprietary investment methodologies, like, to screen everything and to go from like the whole universe of 500 stocks to, coming up with, yes, these are the two stocks that, I want to put my name on, and this is the one that I will defend for. And then you have to, try to essentially, election season, you have to try and pitch it to your other classmates to get them to vote for your stock over theirs or someone else's stock. So it was really nice. They had a lot of resources. They allowed us to use Bloomberg and Python. We did a lot of back testing on historical data to see, whether things like positive earning surprises work or not, in terms of generating positive returns. So yeah, it was they didn't harm us if our bets went wrong. But thankfully they taught us enough that our bets wouldn't go wrong.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, there's a process that you come up with a stock, the class has to vote for it, and then it's actually
Mhm.
invested. So therefore, that's a
Yes.
complete investment thesis driven scenario. Okay. So now then you work for the valuations business of one of the premier firms there. So how was your experience there? And then why did you decide to then come back to India? Because mostly when people go to the US, it's like, okay, green card,
Mhm.
and then forever it's there.
Right. No, no, I understand completely. And my initial motive for going to the US for college was that I wasn't very sure about what I wanted to do. I'm a man of, several interests. And as a kid, I wasn't able to narrow down, what specifically I wanted to do. And in India, the education system is such that, you have to choose specialized colleges to go into, whether it's for, you're pursuing a BCom or whether you want to do engineering or medical. Whereas in the US, in the university style of education, where they have different colleges, you get to do more interdisciplinary stuff. You can try other things. So, for example, I took a class in psychology when I was there. That was my first ever class, and I really enjoyed the concept and the idea of it. And then I proceeded to take around 4 or 5 more classes, and I graduated with a minor in psychology. So, just to create that well-rounded education, essentially the well-rounded perspective, I went there. But yes, after I graduated, it was difficult to find a job for a bit. I think I found that a lot of my peers in college who were American and who didn't have to worry about work authorization issues, they would get jobs much quicker than I did, or would get places placed in areas that wouldn't consider me, because and it makes sense from the company's point of view also. As someone, if you're working on a student visa, you get 1 year of work authorization, unless you go for STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics and medicine. So the hard sciences, you get 3 years of work authorization after your graduation. Otherwise, it's 1 year. So, no company is really looking forward to, training and creating human resource when they're not sure after a year or not they'll continue to work with them, right? So it was definitely a difficult process, I would say, to find work after I graduated, but I did, end up finding this amazing team at Equity Methods. They're based out of Phoenix, Arizona, and what they basically do is stock compensation, valuation, and reporting. So essentially, what they do is they get they have clients, and their clients feature big names like Google and Microsoft. I think they work with 40 or 50 of Fortune 100 companies, and they also work with small startups. And their main pitch is that they help value these complex market linked securities and performance incentive plans, essentially. So we're talking so I was talking to the C-suite level executives, and help and understanding how their compensation is essentially structured. So what happens is, a lot of it is, of course, your salary, the cash you get upfront, the money that gets deposited into your bank account. But then you have your ESOPs that most employees have. And then for managerial level roles, there's a lot of performance stock units, restricted stock units, phantom units, warrants, a lot of different options, essentially, which are linked to your performance. So essentially, say for example, Disney, is currently trading at $40 a stock. And the CEO of Disney has this performance incentive plan in place, where if in 3 years, the performance period, they get the stock price from $40 to $80. Right. So then the pool of shares that are allocated for that particular incentive program gets doubled based on the performance of that company. And then this is also marked relative to companies that are in the same space, or that are relative to them. They have some sort of peer group, and the peer group can be as narrow as, just your next door competitor like Hasbro or something, or it can be as big as, the S&P 500 or even the Russell 3000. We had some companies that would index their performance against the market, essentially, is the idea. And so the reason that this has become a favored way of compensation for executives in the US, and I think worldwide also, is because this means that this gives a lot of motivation for the managers to be keeping the owner's interest and the shareholders' interest in mind, and driving up and linking their remuneration essentially with the stock performance directly. So to do all of that, you need to have these complex mathematical models, which are called Monte Carlo simulations, where basically you have basically you have a few variables that you put in, like volatility, risk-free rate, things like that, and then you simulate it for Disney and say 10 companies in its peer group for 1 lakh times or 5 lakh times over 3 years. And so it's basically like you're modeling the stock price based on a geometrical Brownian motion. I won't get too much into the details, but the idea is that if you do it enough times, it's based on some sort of random movement. At every point, it's either going to go up or down the stock price. And if you do it enough times, then it's the values converge at one point, and that's the fair value. Once you discount it back to today's price, that's the fair value of that particular stock, of that particular incentive plan, let's say. So this was one of the main offerings they did. They had this other team which did the reporting part and created the annual reports for all of these listed companies that they had to publish with the SEC over there. So it was a very niche consulting field, but I got to learn a lot, and I got to work front end also with a big like I have on my LinkedIn, I have like the CSO and CTO of Google and other big companies, because we're working on their incentives, we're working on their remuneration. So I had a one-on-one relationship with them. So it was a really learning experience. Like I learned a lot. I didn't have any experience in coding or modeling or like this kind of mathematical modeling at least. But yeah, I think I was there for a year in the US. I was there, and then I I think I alone helped them build around $2 or $3 million worth of revenue. So it was they gave a lot of responsibility. They looked for people who showed initiative. Um, and they did sponsor me also. So coming back to your question now of why I came back and I didn't stay there, or figured something out. So they did apply for the H-1B visa for me, but it's the seats are of course very less. I think there's 60,000 seats, and that year about like 4 lakh people had applied for those seats. And then the government does a lottery and allocates basically who gets what. So I think in our own organization, about 20 people were international students, or on international work visa, and were applied for the H-1B visa, and only 5 of them got it. So I was unfortunately in one of the groups that didn't get it. Although I know I personally wasn't very I hadn't decided that I wanted to stay in the US forever, because, I was there during a very, very rough time, politically speaking, at least. The COVID situation happened, the Black Lives Matter protest was happening, and I saw a lot of injustice and social evils that are pervasive in American society. And it helped me form this view of, how every place, like, in India, especially, a lot of people have the tendency to say, America is doing this, so it must be right. America is the best country or the biggest country or something of that sort. But it really is just another country with its own pros and cons. And, India too has its own pros and cons. Like, of course, there's some places where we're lacking, but there's also a lot of places where we're moving ahead and doing a lot better. Like, in terms of tolerance, even I would say, like, India is so diverse that our states, between two states, there's so much difference that there isn't probably in all of Europe, So there we have a lot of things to look forward to, and you need to pick and choose what you can work with and what you can't work with. So I wasn't really very upset about the fact that I didn't get my H-1B visa and I didn't get to stay there anyway. After a year of work, I realized that a lot of the learning I had done, had reached a sort of ceiling, and now all of the learning I was doing would be horizontal instead of vertical. It was more about taking on more projects at the same time, taking on a little more managerial role, doing the same thing more efficiently. But just going straight out of college, I wasn't very keen on entering such a niche field and making my career in that. So my directors asked me, they offered me a few routes out of this conundrum. They said that there are specialized courses that happen, essentially a master's degree, but then part of your coursework requires you to be working in the US. So a lot of people opt for that sort of situation to continue working in the US. You're making money on the weekdays, and then on the weekends you go to class and do online classes and that sort of thing. or like one of my other colleagues did, he moved to Mexico, which is not that much of a time difference, and also has a much lower cost of living, and then he was working remotely from there um with them. But I didn't feel like moving to a new country to continue the same work. And I always wanted to come back to India and work here and experience the work culture here, the industry here, and see where opportunities are, essentially. And the only way to do that is by getting your hands dirty, by getting in the getting on the ground, and starting to do things that and failing and trying again, and that's how you figure out what works and what doesn't work. So plus, of course, I also missed my family a lot. So yeah, so I came back so I came back a year and a half ago, yes, after 5 years in the US, 4 years of undergrad and a year of working at Equity Methods. I came back. Um, yeah, I personally think that, my experience in the US had created this idea that a lot of money was coming into India. And, as a finance professional, like, the best way to make money is to be around money, you know. Uh, and there's just so much more capital coming into India in terms of the development index, that all of these big funds that are based out of the US or Europe, they have this small part of their portfolio is based on development countries or developing countries. And the kind of returns that India is giving, no other economy is coming close to even providing that same sort of returns and
I agree.
stability,
There's a lot of money
right?
coming
So,
to India, and I think one of the best places to be is here now. And thanks for
mhm,
being very candid about
100%.
US, because generally, if anyone with a US antecedent generally paints a very
Mhm.
larger than life image around
Right.
US. But
Mhm.
the harsh reality is there, getting these work permits, this H1 visa, the loneliness factor
Mhm.
that you're away from family,
Right.
and then
Right.
learning as well takes a plateau at some point of time. And then the excitement
Mhm.
is in India at some point of time. I've seen a lot
Mhm.
of people from the US, like Americans who have
Mhm.
now settled in Bombay, working in the Indian equity
Right.
markets. So from that perspective, I
Mhm.
think this really connects that
Mhm.
hypothesis. So then you worked, I think, in two roles. So if you could tell us about those
Mhm.
two roles, one I think was investment, and one was more around sustainability and all of this. So yeah,
Right.
we'll pick up
Yeah.
that question and then move to the IIM Ahmedabad journey. Yeah, that would be our final
Sure.
two questions then.
Okay. Thanks, Anurag. Yeah, so I came back to India, and I've always been very passionate about sustainability and clean energy. Even as a kid, I always thought about, that we have, so when I learned about solar energy in class 6 or 7, I realized how much potential, in India, especially in the summers, there's so much energy that we could be harnessing, but we aren't harnessing, and that's a market opportunity. But by the time I grew up and was able to do anything about it, the Tatas and Adanis had already entered the market. So I wanted to get some more exposures, some hands-on experience in the energy space or the sustainability space, and as well as the VC space. I've given my past experience in equity research and portfolio management. I wanted to work with startups. I wanted to see what, as an investor, people look at when you're evaluating startups, and how the due diligence process goes on. So I had started my initial role at Artha Energy Projects, or Artha Venture Fund, which is their flagship fund, under Anirudh Damani, who's the founder and managing director of Artha. So I was working as a founder's office analyst, so I got to work very closely with him. And I was helping him, across a lot of separate domains, his personal investments, the investments that were being done under Artha Venture Fund. They had a couple of other corporate entities that they used to do investments in, outside of India, and syndicate deals on. So it was a lot of different things were going on. You're looking at international investments. You're looking on current MIS of companies that you're already invested in. You're looking at they had a couple of very interesting models in place. They had this idea that the money that they would get from their private equity pool, like from their VC fund, whatever returns they would get, they would use it to buy fixed assets like renewable energy, like solar plants or windmills, and then that would keep giving them a fixed return essentially that they could take on and put it back into their fund. So the idea was to create a permanent capital vehicle, sort of similar to what Berkshire Hathaway has done. So they were looking at a lot of different avenues, like, renewable energy was one. There was an asset-backed working capital model where basically there's a sale and buyback model, sale and lease model, where, for example, like you buy a car and then I'll take that car away from you on a lease and I'll, give it to Uber or something, and you'll keep getting a fixed sort of money each month based on whatever performance it is. So the idea was to create a steady flow of revenue, and that would feed into the VC fund, and from the returns from the VC fund would create a bigger pool to create that steadier revenue. But yeah, that was a really that was a great experience, I would say. I got to learn a lot, especially about how India works, how the work culture in India is, even just like court proceedings, because one of the windmills that we were bidding on, that we were trying to acquire, was in the NCLT court. So, I learned a lot of different things, lot of, small things, administrative things also that people would maybe overlook, but it does play a vital role, in creating this cohesive sort of knowledge about what to do and how to proceed about things, a bottom up approach of learning essentially. Um, so while I was there, the work hours were quite stretched, like it is in the VC space, VCP space. And I was already taking a pay cut coming from the US to India. Like, while it was adjusted for power, purchasing power parity, it was still not enough in Mumbai to survive or, thrive, rather, I would say. So I was looking at more opportunities and I wanted to explore the sustainability field a little more. So then I quit my job. I think a couple of days before the CAT exam is when my last day was. So I gave the CAT with quite little preparation, I would say, because I know my friends who have spent, a lot of time and a lot of money into preparing for CAT exams. But I spent about maybe like 15 to 20 days while I was still working at Artha. I was pulling 12 to 14 hours a day. And then I gave the CAT and I got a 99.98 percentile. So, that was very validating for me to, to believe in myself, to keep pushing forward and, imagining that, and creating the reality that I want to live in, one step at a time, essentially. So my other role that you mentioned is with this non-profit organization called TechnoServe India. So it's part of this larger global non-profit, and they run a lot of programs with funders. So most of them are agri-based, out of India at least. I think they have currently 6 or 7 programs, out of which 5 are agri based, where they connect, Walmarts and L'Oreal to farmers in Bihar or Rajasthan, and they do the sustainable tracking of resources essentially. And this program that I was a part of is called the Greener Sustainability Accelerator, and it's basically a randomized control trial which is funded by the IKEA Foundation and the Visa Foundation. And the idea is to show that if you provide just core consulting, we would do operational, strategic, fundraising, capacity building essentially for them. We wouldn't put our own money. I mean, as a nonprofit, we don't have any money. We aren't investing in the companies that would become a part of the accelerator, but we would help them, get access to funding. We would help them, whether
Fantastic.
it's yeah, so it was an amazing experience. Yesterday was my last day. It was a bittersweet moment, because going to a better place, IIM Ahmedabad, but working with the team, and they're so dedicated in the space, in the sustainability space especially. Their main focus was on waste, a lot of waste to value propositions have come up in India, which are, valid worldwide. I think, there's a lot of scope in that aspect, as well as, there's textiles and circular economy, there's agroforestry. So that sort of thing, I got to work with. And I think this is probably the largest accelerator in India of its kind. because their goal is to work with 400 startups in 3 years. And these are not just like, pre-revenue idea stage companies. No, these are companies that have been working for 2 years, 5 years, have been making money, and now they want to, tap into nearby states, or they want export linkages, or they want to try, move something into R&D. They want to help scale, and that is where we stepped in, and we helped them make all of these connections. And across the industry, also the impact investment ecosystem is essentially where this was positioned. And in India, it's still quite a developing phase. Having worked in the VCPE space, I had some exposure to it. But usually, what happens is the VC space is more conservative. I know it sounds a little odd, but they're more conservative in the sort of sectors and the sort of companies and ideas that they back. They love fintech, they love SaaS, they love EV at one point, and space tech. There's these sectors ebb and flow, but these kind of sectors, the waste to value sector, for example, or textile or like agri-tech sort of sector, where you require a much more patient horizon. You need, at least 2 more years than your normal VC investment would
Hmm.
look at. So this is not a space where a lot of players are involved in currently. So part of our job is also, this is still in the first year of its conception, this program is. So part of our job is also, helping build this ecosystem in India, make those connections. We had networking events in Bangalore and Mumbai where we had, investors, we had entrepreneurship support organizations, we had banks, we had corporate houses, just basically anybody interested in this space. We had incubators, like IIM Ventures and IIM Nagpur. So a lot of different sort of organizations in the same space, getting them in the same room, and then it was just amazing to see the synergies that came out of it. There's people making contacts, that are completely different, whether it's two founders or two investors or two NGOs that are working out on a new program, and just helping create that space was a really rewarding experience for me. And I think that's where I found my groove.
And I think very interestingly, I think if you look at the major events, one was that topping the boards in various formats in the school at the state level, the
Hmm.
US journey, post US, then coming to India, working in investments, then in sustainability, and now joining IIM Ahmedabad. So if you
Hmm.
could quickly tell us, maybe in a couple of minutes, about that whole process of getting into IIM and what you look forward to as we wrap up this interview now. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Yes. No, the IIM Ahmedabad has always been, on a pedestal for every Indian student, forever. So getting into a university with this sort of the sort of faculty they have, the knowledge they have, and especially the networking connections they have, for me was the biggest draw, like the biggest attracting factor. Because I feel like a lot of heads of organizations that I've come across have been IIM Ahmedabad graduates, and people who are from IIM Ahmedabad have this close-knit sort of community of recognition, at least, that can get you into the right room at the right places. Even the nonprofit that I was telling you about, TechnoServe, right? So their regional director for India in this area he's also Joydeep, Mr. Joydeep. He's also an IIM Ahmedabad pass out. So it was just it makes sense, and it's contextualized more in the Indian setting. So I wanted to get a more holistic understanding. Essentially, I had applied. I also gave the GMAT. Actually, I gave it in February, which was a bit late, by most application standards. And I gave the GMAT focus where I got a score of 755. And I had applied to a few foreign universities. The main goal being that, if I was going to pursue an education, after working for a while, I wanted to get some foundational knowledge in sustainability or environmental sciences or something like that, because I've realized that that is where I want to build my career. And, that's where I can create more impact, where I can, make money also, and I can, be excited about the work I'm doing. But then after working at Greener, with these people and making the kinds of connection that I have now, I realized that the sort of knowledge that you get by doing this, as a job, as an internship, or working in it is going to be, very different than the sort of academic background underpinnings that are there. So, Compared to that, and of course, the ROI factor is also there. The
Yeah.
cost is a big concern, and it's not always feasible. But yeah, getting into IIM Ahmedabad, I when I had applied for the CAT exam, it was my dad who actually dared me. He told me, like, just sign up for the CAT exam. We'll see, how it goes. If you get into
And
IIM
seems
ABC,
come up so well. Yeah.
yeah.
And now
So
you're
I
joining
had never.
when? June this week, next week, on a couple of weeks now.
Yes, yes, yes. The
Super.
joining is starting mid-June, right? Yeah. So I'm really excited. I at the event that we met, I met a lot of very cool people, like people from very different backgrounds, all coming together. So, I'm always been a firm believer of, the fact that you can learn something from everybody, whether like it's some guy you meet on the road, like there's something to be learned every day, and learning is a lifelong process. So I'm really excited to just be in the same space as some of the brightest minds in India, and then hopefully in the same rooms with some of the brightest minds as well. So I think that's
Fantastic.
what I'm most excited about.
I mean, that feeling will always be there that you will be with the best. So thank you so much, Rishabh, for coming on this show. And this was a really useful rendition of your entire journey for which has happened in the last decade or so. I would suggest people to connect with Rishabh on LinkedIn, and you can just search Rishab Somani, and that will be great if you can mentor some people. Thank you so much again
Of
for coming
course.
on this show. Bye bye.
Thank you so much for